human rights organizations have finally got around to pointing to Israel as having an apartheid regime. And, international human rights organizations are pointing to not only 67, but also 48, which is very, very significant. The UN, again, the UN has not gone that far yet, inshallah, hopefully, inshallah, we will, or the UN will. But certainly these human rights organizations are pointing to what, of course, Palestinians have been saying for decades, and what is, again, clear as the light of day to any impartial observer, namely that, you have certainly in the West Bank, and most people would recognize within 48 a situation of apartheid. I don't have the slides today of the definition of apartheid, but there is an international definition of apartheid. I mean, it's in the Apartheid Convention of 73, and it is also in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court as a crime against humanity. A system of racial domination that aims at maintaining a situation of dominance of one ethnic group over another. I mean, this is like a dictionary definition of what's going on in Palestine, right? So apartheid is clear. When people are talking about the Nakba and what is still going on, really, I mean, the Nakba has never ended. What is going on in 67, and again also in 48, people also have used the term ethnic cleansing, and of course Ilian Pape was very instrumental in using this term ethnic cleansing of Palestine, and making this into a sort of a widely accepted terminology, if you like. I personally have, I think it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that people sort of recognize the situation in Palestine as one of ethnic cleansing. But as an international lawyer, I have a little bit of trouble with it because, ethnic cleansing, the terminology ethnic cleansing itself is not clearly defined in international law. In fact, it was created in when Yugoslavia was falling apart, and in the situation in Bosnia mainly. And it was created precisely because there was no real definition, and because, somehow the Western powers thought that this new terminology was different from genocide. And this somehow got them off the hook from doing anything about it. So it's like, well, it's not genocide. Yeah, if it was genocide, yeah, we'd have to do something about it. We'd have to actually take, serious measures to stop it. But it's not really genocide. You can't really call it genocide. It's more like it's ethnic cleansing. That's really how this terminology came about. So, I'm not the first one to say this. I mean, other scholars have also pointed this out and have argued, as I would as well, that it should be called, we call a spade. It's genocide. I mean, it's that simple. And, again, there's an international definition of genocide. And, we could sort of, people could debate about whether the situation in Palestine fits that. I think it most certainly does. But, this sort of ethnic cleansing is kind of a cop-out. It's legally speaking, it's a sort of graphic way of sort of portraying what's been going on. And so, in that way, getting that picture across to people who don't know about Palestine is not such a bad thing. But in legal terms, it's not necessarily the most potent weapon. I would say certainly genocide, we call a spade. It is genocide, clear and simple. Genocide, and also apartheid. What's happening is an apartheid regime. That's very clear. Oops. So yeah, again, I understand, I just found out as we were beginning that most of the people are familiar with the situation in Palestine. So I don't think I really need to spend too much time over this. I wanted to sort of look at the whole issue of colonization. And as you can see, I have these maps of the colonization of the West Bank. Settlements are a term which are used by the United Nations, and you find any kind of English speaking media, you'll see settlement this, settlement that. I really don't like the term because it makes it sound like people come and there's nobody living in the land. It's a land with no people, so we plop our stuff down and it's a settlement. No, it's a colony. What's going on is, of course, stealing land, driving people off their land, and then building your own city, your ethnically exclusive city on top of that. So it is colonization. I mean, that's very clear. And historically speaking, when the Zionists were talking about Palestine, they used the word colonization very, very openly. There was no sort of ifs, ands, or buts about this. This was very clear. It was colonization. And that's because at the time, colonization was not really a dirty word. It was, we're talking the late 19th century in Europe. And for them, the white people going and taking land and colonizing land from darker skinned people. This is just like, yeah, okay, we have a more advanced civilization, we have better weapons. This is just what we're going to do, and the natives are actually going to be grateful to us for bringing Western civilization. All this kind of nonsense. But the term colonization was used very, very openly. It's only recently that that certainly post-war that the Israelis have tried to clamp down on the use of this term, because now it's a dirty word. But it was always very open, and that's really what's been going on. I have this little graph of the population of the colonial settlers in the West Bank. The map itself is a little bit old, but basically the numbers keep on increasing. Everybody here knows that. So and then I have some pictures of colonies, again, because when I'm doing these kind of talks to people who aren't that familiar with Palestine, I want to show them what it looks like. I think we all know what these are. I think this is from the UK, if I remember correctly. Certainly in the US and a lot of other countries, you have these websites with connections to the Jewish National Fund and also to the government itself, the Israeli government itself, promoting sort of directed at Jewish people in that country and saying, why don't you return to Israel and you can live in these communities or neighborhoods, which are, as you see, colonies built on stolen Palestinian land. Then these are the roads. I'm sorry about this, but I got together all these slides thinking that it was going to be directed at people who weren't that familiar with Palestine. But since that's not the case, we'll just sort of skip over that and go straight to the issue of justice and impunity. Gaza, blockade here, I'm sorry, we're just sort of zipping through all of these. And these are the three major offenses, of course, one of which, at least the International Criminal Court is supposedly going to be looking at. Well, they are looking at it. They are looking at it, and hopefully, inshallah, they will actually, move to indicting some of the violations. I'm looking at Defensive Edge. This was 2014. It happened right after I left Palestine, just by chance. I was recruited to go to Palestine right after Cast led, and I left out of my own accord. I mean, I left the United Nations, and I left right just before this happened, just a couple of months before Defensive Edge. And then, of course, the Great March of Return in Gaza. And I know everybody has been monitoring this and been looking at this, and they know about this. Really, from the international human rights law. From the perspective of an international human rights lawyer, one of the really stark things about the situation in Palestine is, of course, the impunity. So the ongoing impunity for Israelis. Palestinians are persecuted left and right. They live, in particular, in the West Bank, especially in the West Bank, and I include East Jerusalem, but also, Palestinians everywhere, and that includes the refugee population, the diaspora, who are barred from returning to their country and reclaiming their land. We have this situation where Palestinians live in this apartheid system, are unable to exercise most of their rights, and basically face ongoing persecution. And the Israelis that are committing these rights violations enjoy basically complete and almost absolute impunity. I mean, I don't think I'm going off the reservation when I put it that way. Israeli soldiers, police, there's a huge body of research done by human rights organizations that show how the Israeli military and the police have, they get away with, basically everything, the excessive use of force, killings, all of these things that they do, they have impunity in practice. It's also the case, of course, with Israeli colonizers, the colonial settlers, who are civilians. They're not, they're not soldiers, they're not police. I'm not saying that to say that somehow soldiers and police should be given impunity. Of course, that's not the point. But colonizers as well. Palestinians everywhere, but certainly in the West Bank, they are what are called a protected population in international humanitarian law. So the laws of war. So this means that it's okay that the IDF is there but they have to be there to protect them from any kind of wrongdoing. They're like the police in a way. They have to protect the Palestinians as a specially protected population. The colonizers are not supposed to be there. The colonies are not supposed to be there. Israeli people they're not supposed to be living there, stealing Palestinian land. It's a grave violation of international law. But even supposing they're there, the point is that the IDF are supposed to protect the Palestinians from the colonizers. But of course, that's not what happens. And again, there's a wealth of research done by human rights organizations about how colonizers, go on, attack Palestinians with military escort using. There's even these pictures you can get off the internet. B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights organization, they used to sort of distribute cameras to Palestinians in vulnerable locations near the colonies, all that kind of thing. So there's plenty of information. There's no sort of serious dispute that this happens, and there's no serious dispute about the extent of impunity that colonial settlers also enjoy. Recently, we saw the pogrom in Harawa. So settler violence is increasing. I mean, the UN, which also collects data, that the settler violence is increasing, and there's no serious prospect that settlers are going to be brought to justice, and any kind of measure is going to be taken to prevent this kind of lawlessness in the West Bank. I mean, there's no serious discussion of that. Certainly not under the current Israeli government, which is, of course, basically populated by extremists. But every single Israeli government has advanced the colonization of Palestinian land. The labor governments, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just that these people that are in power in Israel now are just more overt and more sort of blatant in advancing the kind of stuff that basically every Israeli government has done to certain, to various different extents. So, that's what we have, and that's where we get to the International Criminal Court. As a human rights lawyer, one thing I teach human rights in my women's university in Osaka, and I think a lot of people have this impression of human rights as being sort of fluffy and holding hands and that kind of stuff, being nice to people and considerate, and then of course protecting weak people and protecting victims. That's of course an integral part of human rights, but it's also about accountability, and it's also about holding powerful people accountable for human rights violations. That's a very fundamental part of human rights that goes back to the Nuremberg trials right after World War II. Not only is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, together with the Universal Declaration, the Statute of Nuremberg, and that whole body of law holding wrongdoers accountable, that's all, these are the two pillars of human rights, truly speaking. So, the human rights movement for decades had been lobbying for the establishment of an international criminal court. For decades, when I was working at Amnesty, this was one of the major planks of what the international human rights movement was calling on the international community to do. And so finally, we were successful, and the Rome Statute was written up in 1998, and the court itself was established in 2002. It's not part of the UN as such. It's an independent international organization. And so, states become state parties to the ICC in the same way that they become state parties to the UN. We have just something. Okay, perhaps I'll look at this a little bit later. Just something in the chat. So, the ICC, of course, the US is not state party to it. Surprise, surprise. Israel is not state party to it. Surprise, surprise. There is, there's a lot of the powerful countries are not state party. For Russia is not a state party to the ICC either. So that's a little bit disappointing in many ways. That's one of the problems that international law, as currently constituted, has. I mean, a state has to raise its hand and agree to be state party. But there are ways around that, and we'll talk about that. So the ICC was established to look at cases of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity.